The leash snapped taut, yanking Officer Mike Evans' shoulder so hard he nearly dropped his flashlight. The nylon strap didn't just pull, it burned, slicing a raw red line across his palm, even through the tactical glove. "Ruger, heel!" The command was air. It was useless. The dog, a 75-pound Belgian Malinois, was a statue of coiled muscle. His gaze locked on the overgrown weeds behind the maintenance shed. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He opened his mouth and let out a sound that Evans hadn't heard in 3 years, a high-pitched, agonizing whine. It was a sound of pure, abject terror. Pause for effect. The 30-second hook is complete. We are just getting started. If you want to find out what Ruger found in the dark, you need to hit that subscribe button and tap the notification bell, because you are not going to want to miss a single second of what happens next. All right. For those of you who just subscribed, let's get back to it. Here's the crazy part. This was supposed to be the easiest day of Evans's week. It was 4:00 p.m. at Maplewood Elementary. The last of the yellow buses had pulled away an hour ago, leaving that specific, hollow silence that only empty schools have. The air smelled like cut grass and chalk. This was suburbia, the kind of place where the biggest crime report in a week was a stolen bicycle or a complaint about teens existing too loudly in the 7-Eleven parking lot. Evans and Ruger were only here as community outreach. That's what the chief called it. In reality, it was a PR stunt. Some high school kid had been caught vaping behind the bleachers last week, and the PTA, a notoriously high-strung group of Volvo-driving suburban perfect parents, had gone ballistic. They demanded action. They wanted drug-sniffing dogs to send a message, so Evans was sent on this pointless errand. He was a highly trained canine officer, and Ruger was a $50,000 dual-purpose canine, trained for narcotics and human remains, and they were here to find vape pens. Evans was, to put it mildly, annoyed. He was thinking about lasagna. It was lasagna night. His daughter Chloe had a soccer game at 6 Anchor, and if he didn't get home soon, his wife Sarah would have to juggle the pickup, the game, and the oven all by herself. "All right, partner," Evans had mumbled, clicking his tongue. "One last pass by the shed and we're out of here. Go find." Ruger had been in narc mode, happy, sniffy, tail wagging. His job was to find illegal drugs, a game he loved to play. He'd dutifully sniffed the shed door, the trash cans, an old lawnmower. Nothing. Of course nothing. Evans was reaching for the radio to clear the call. "Dispatch 7K9, we are clear from the sweep at..." That's when it happened. The jolt, the burn on his hand, and the whine. Evans's blood went cold. He dropped the radio, letting it dangle from its shoulder mic. He knew that sound. Every K9 handler knows the sound. It's not in the training manuals. It's not the bark for a toy, the growl for a threat, or the hit alert for narcotics. It's the sound the dog makes when it finds something that is so profoundly wrong, so offensive to the natural order, that its processor-like brain short-circuits. It's a sound of grief. Evans had only heard it once before. 3 years ago. The Boulder Cliffs incident. A hiker, missing for 2 weeks in the pouring rain. Ruger had found what was left of him in a ravine. The dog hadn't barked. He had sat, looked back at Evans, and made that same soul-chilling sound. "No," Evans whispered, his voice catching in the dry autumn air. "No, boy. Not here. This was Maplewood. This was a school. The worst things here were bullies and bad cafeteria food. Ruger, come on. It's a coon, a dead raccoon." But Ruger wouldn't budge. He was planted, a 75-pound anchor of pure instinct. He was staring at a patch of mossy, compacted earth between the shed's foundation and a rusty, broken-down tractor mower that hadn't moved in a decade. The dog was terrified. His tail was tucked so far between his legs it was practically touching his stomach. But he was also doing his job. He was pulling now, fighting his own fear, trying to drag Evans toward the spot. "Show me," Evans said. The boredom was gone. The annoyance was gone. The thoughts of lasagna and soccer games evaporated, replaced by the metallic taste of adrenaline. Evans unclipped the leash, letting it drop. Ruger wouldn't leave his side now. He clicked on his heavy-duty flashlight, even though the sun hadn't fully set. The beam cut through the shadows, illuminating the patch of dead weeds. It looked like nothing, just dirt. Ruger crept forward, his belly low to the ground. He nudged a clump of dead leaves with his nose. He sniffed once, twice. He inhaled deep and long, and the air he exhaled was a shudder. Then, he gave the final alert. He sat. He looked directly at Mike Evans, his intelligent brown eyes wide with a distress that was almost human. And he lifted his head and gave that low, mournful whine one more time. Evans's training took over. He wasn't a husband or a father anymore. He was a cop. He looked at the patch of ground. He looked at his K9 partner, who was now trembling. He looked at the cheerful, bright red school door just 50 yards away, where his own daughter might one day attend class. He picked up his radio mic. His hand was perfectly steady. Dispatch, 7K9. Go ahead, 7K9. I need you to send my supervisor to my location. And dispatch? Evans paused, taking a hard look at the ground. You need to call the on-call detective and tell them to bring a shovel. Officer Evans clicked his radio mic off. The silence that rushed back in was profound, heavier, and more absolute than the quiet of the empty schoolyard had been just moments before. He could hear his own heartbeat, a dull thumping drum against the inside of his vest. Ruger was still trembling, a low, continuous shudder that ran through the dog's powerful frame. Evans knelt, his knee cracking on the cold ground, and put a hand on his partner's neck. The fur was bristled and damp. Easy, boy. Easy. You did good, Evans whispered, his voice a low rumble meant only for the dog. You did your job, it's okay. But Ruger wasn't looking at him. His dark, intelligent eyes were fixed on that one patch of moss-covered earth. He didn't blink. He was on duty, locked in by an instinct thousands of years old. An instinct that told him death was here. Evans stood up, forcing himself to break the K9's gaze and scan the perimeter. The late afternoon sun was dying, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. The shadows from the maintenance shed stretched like long black fingers across the soccer field. 50 yards away, the kindergarten playground, a riot of primary red, yellow, and blue plastic, sat silent. A small tire swing twisted slowly on its chain. Creak, creak, creak. The sound was almost deafening in the quiet. This was wrong. All of it. Cops get a feeling. A cold, electric tingle up the spine that says the world is tilted off its axis. Evans felt it now. This was Maplewood Elementary. This was where his own daughter, Chloe, would be coming in 2 years. This was a place of bake sales, PTA meetings, and laminated artwork taped to windows. It was not a place for that sound Ruger had made. Headlights swung across the field, bouncing over the uneven grass. A standard-issue patrol SUV, a Ford Explorer, crunched to a stop on the gravel access path. Sergeant Brody heaved himself out of the driver's seat. Brody was a 25-year veteran, a lifer in the classic mold. He was 2 years from his pension, nursing a bad knee and an even worse attitude toward anything that created unnecessary paperwork. He walked over, his utility belt creaking, his face set in a permanent look of mild annoyance. Evans, Brody, grunted. He didn't say hello. He just looked at the patch of ground, then at the dog, then back at Evans. You better not have pulled me off a hot call for a dead coon. It's not a raccoon, Sarge, Evans said. His voice was quiet, but firm. He'd been a K9 handler for 6 years. He was used to the skepticism from patrol officers. They trusted guns and handcuffs. Evans trusted his dog. He's just sitting there, Brody observed, stating the obvious. That's the alert, Evans said, his patience thin. A passive, final indication for human remains. He's trained to sit and stare at the source. Brody sighed, a long, theatrical exhalation. He rubbed the back of his thick neck. Kid probably buried his hamster mic or a damn goldfish. We are out of school. Do you have any idea the kind of hell the school board and the PTA are going to rain down on this department if we start digging up their soccer field for a dead pet? I'll be filling out forms in triplicate for a month. Evans stared at his sergeant. This is the same alert he gave at Boulder Cliffs. The name dropped into the air and hung there. Boulder Cliffs, the missing hiker, the scene that had taken 2 rookies off the job permanently. Brody's cynical expression wavered, just for a second. He remembered the smell. Everyone did. You're sure? Brody said. It wasn't a question. I'm sure, Evans replied. Brody's face hardened. The annoyance was gone, replaced by the grim mask of a cop, about to do something he didn't want to do. All right, fine. But you're buying the beer if this is a box of Playboy magazines from 1993. He went back to his SUV, popped the trunk, and pulled out a standard-issue collapsible shovel. It was small, more of an entrenching tool designed for digging contraband out of a ditch, not for an excavation. He walked back and jabbed the shovel point at the ground. Here? Right here? Evans nodded, pulling Ruger back a few feet by his collar. The dog didn't want to move. He whined in protest, his gaze still locked on the spot. Easy boy, watch. Brody jammed the shovel into the earth. The first 6 inches were soft, loamy topsoil, thick with roots and night crawlers. He tossed it aside. See? Nothing. Just... He jammed the shovel in again, putting his boot and his 230 pounds behind it. Thud. It wasn't the wet thunk of hitting a deep root. It wasn't the sharp skipping ping of hitting fieldstone. It was a hollow, flat, resonant thud that seemed to vibrate up the shovel handle and into Brody's bones. Brody froze. He stared at the shovel handle, his knuckles white. What was that? He whispered, his bravado gone. Dig again, Sarge, Evans said, his voice tight. Brody repositioned the tool, scraping the loose dirt away from the impact point. He tapped the surface gently. Thud. 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 Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, Brody breathed. He dropped the shovel as if it were hot and fell to his knees, clawing at the compacted dirt with his gloved hands. Evans was right beside him, his powerful flashlight beam cutting a perfect white circle in the deepening gloom. The dirt was packed hard, stubborn. But as they cleared it, the shape became undeniable. It wasn't a pipe. It wasn't a utility box. It wasn't a dead hamster. The flashlight beam illuminated a flat gray surface, metal, rusted at the edges where moisture had seeped in. Evans ran the beam along the line they had exposed. It was long, at least 6 feet, and it was tapered at one end. Brody sat back on his heels, his face pale and sick in the white light. It's a box, he said, but his voice had no conviction. He already knew the answer. Evans stood up slowly and backed away, pulling a stunned Ruger with him. He looked at the hole, then at the school, then back at his superior officer. No, Sarge, Evans said, his voice barely a whisper. That's not a box. Sergeant Brody looked up at Evans, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. Get on the radio, Evans, Brody commanded, his voice shaking. Now you call the watch commander. You call the DA, you call the medical examiner. He took a deep, shuddering breath. You call everyone. The quiet panic of 2 patrol officers doesn't last long. It's a spark. Brody's call was the gasoline. Within 20 minutes, the sleepy, dead-end access road to Maplewood Elementary looked like the finale of a disaster movie. The pulsing red and blue lights strobed against the brick walls, the playground, and the faces of the neighbors who were now gathering on their lawns, pulling bathrobes tight against the night's chill. Car doors slammed. Radios squawked with the clipped, emotionless language of dispatch. The scene was flooded with uniforms, each one creating a ripple in the procedural pond. They set up the yellow tape, crime scene do not cross, a flimsy plastic barrier that instantly transformed the soccer field into a place of violation. Detective Sal Harding's unmarked city-issued Impala rolled past the barricade, not with urgency, but with a kind of weary inevitability. He didn't use sirens. Sirens were for rookies and emergencies. This, he knew, was no longer an emergency. It was an excavation. Harding was a dinosaur. He wore a rumpled blazer that always smelled faintly of stale coffee and file folders. At 58, he'd seen this quiet, affluent suburb slowly curdle at the edges, and every call-out after 5 p.m. felt like a personal insult. He grabbed his heavy-duty maglite from the passenger seat, which was a graveyard of empty foam coffee cups. He stepped out of the car, his bad knee groaning in protest. The first thing he saw was the local news van, a Channel 6 Newshawk truck already idling at the tape. "Vultures," he muttered. He found Brody standing near the hole looking green. Sergeant Brody, a man Harding had known for 20 years, looked like he was about to throw up on his own boots. "What have we got, Brody?" Harding's voice was gravel. "You're not going to believe it, Sal," Brody said, his voice shaky. I wouldn't have called you in, but just look." Harding walked over, his footsteps heavy on the damp grass. Evans, the K-9 officer, was standing a few yards back with his dog, who was still panting with an anxious, high-pitched rhythm. Harding gave the dog a respectful nod. "Good dog," he said, acknowledging the animal's work first. Then he angled his maglite into the hole. Harding didn't gasp. He didn't swear. He just stopped. He stood there for a full 10 seconds, the beam of his flashlight illuminating the long, tapered metallic shape nestled in the dark, wet clay. The scene was a cacophony of noise, radios, shouting, generators, firing up, but in Harding's mind it went completely silent. He saw the object for what it was, and he saw where it was. His light panned up, away from the grave, and scanned the area. It caught the bright yellow plastic of the kindergarten slide. It caught the small, colorful handprints painted on the wall of the school's art room. It caught the little hopscotch squares painted on the asphalt path. "I got a granddaughter in 3rd grade, Harding said, his voice quiet, directed at no one. "Goes to Lincoln over on the west side. She loves hopscotch." Brody just nodded, swallowing hard. This was the violation. Not just the body, but the place. "Okay," Harding said, snapping back to the present. The dad was gone. The detective was back. "Who's been in the hole?" "Just me, Sal, to dig." Evans didn't cross the perimeter once the dog alerted. "Good." Harding turned as the heavy white van from the medical examiner's office rolled onto the grass, its headlights cutting through the chaos. "This is a full package scene. I want a 30-yard perimeter. Get these uniforms to push the neighbors back. Get that news van out of my sightline." He barked orders with the low, effortless authority of a man who had commanded scenes like this for 2 decades. "I want a single-access logbook now. Nobody, and I mean nobody, not even the chief, steps on this field without signing in. Where is forensics?" "On the way," a rookie said. "Good. Nobody touches the object. Nobody touches the dirt around it." He looked at the ME's attendant who was starting to unload a gurney. "You wait," Harding commanded. "This isn't a snatch and grab. This is an archaeological dig." For the next hour, Harding did what detectives mostly do. He waited, and he drank bad coffee. The forensics team arrived, led by Jen Tanaka, a woman half his age who wore a full-body Tyvek suit and spoke with clinical precision. They set up massive, tripod-mounted floodlights, turning the patch of earth into a bizarre, overlit movie set. Harding watched them work. They were meticulous. They photographed the ground from every conceivable angle. They took soil samples. They used brushes and small vacuums on the exposed surface of the casket lid, looking for fibers, hairs, or paint chips. They were dusting the rusted metal for a print, a futile but necessary act. Harding stepped away, letting the white suits do their dance. He walked back toward the school building, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Maplewood Elementary. The name was itching at the back of his brain. He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through his contacts, but he didn't need to. The memory was already surfacing, climbing up from the cold case files in his mind. 9 years. Yeah, must be. 9 years ago now, it wasn't a homicide, it was a missing person. A walk away. Harding remembered the file because it had annoyed him. It was too clean. Elizabeth Gable, a 28-year-old bright-eyed 3rd grade teacher. New to the district, The kids loved her. She finished her classes one Friday afternoon. Her car was still in the parking lot. Her purse was on her desk. Her car keys were right next to the purse. She had just vanished. They'd treated it as a missing person. Maybe she ran off with a lover. Maybe she had a mental break. The department had looked for a week, and then the case went cold, filed away under miscellaneous non-suspicious. Harding looked at the hole. He looked at the white, sterile forensic tent that was now being erected over the hole. Not a walk away. He breathed. This was a burial, a formal one. Someone hadn't just dumped a body. They had acquired a casket. They had dug a 6-foot hole. They had buried her in the one place no one would ever think to look, a place of safety and innocence. Sal. Tanaka's voice cut through his thoughts. We're done on the surface. We're ready to lift. Harding nodded, tossing the dregs of his coffee onto the grass. He walked back over. The ME's team brought heavy-duty nylon straps. They slid them under the casket, with practiced care. On 3, the attendant said. 1, 2, 3, lift. With a grunt and the sound of suction as the clay released its grip, the object came free. It was real. They hoisted it clear and gently, placing it on the damp grass under the floodlights. It was simple, gray, and flecked with rust. A cheap steel coffin. Hannah pointed her flashlight at the lid. There's a small plate, detective, a nameplate, but it's completely corroded. Can't read a thing. It's fine, Harding said. He looked at the empty rectangular void in the ground. A perfect dark grave just yards from the swing set. Get it to the tent, he ordered Dr. Aris, the medical examiner. Gently. I want it opened, and I want it opened now. The forensic tent was a world unto itself. Outside the soccer field was a 3-ring circus of flashing lights, radio chatter, and the low murmur of the growing crowd. But inside the white vinyl walls, the only sounds were the hum of a portable generator and the rustle of Tyvek suits. The air was sterile, sharp with the smell of latex and cleaning chemicals, all trapped under the harsh, shadowless glare of the battery-powered floodlights. The casket sat in the center of a blue plastic tarp. It looked small, insignificant, and terribly sad. It wasn't an ornate, expensive coffin. It was a bottom-of-the-line steel model, the kind you'd see in a pauper's grave painted a flat industrial gray. The rust wasn't just on the edges. It had blossomed in cancerous-looking patches all over the lid. Detective Harding stood. In the corner, arms crossed, coffee long forgotten. He was a stone pillar in a rumpled blazer, watching the ritual unfold. Dr. Aris, the medical examiner, was in charge now. He was a small, precise man with delicate hands and an expression of permanent academic curiosity. Beside him was Jen Tanaka, the forensics lead. They were the priests and priestesses of this strange, sterile church. Okay, Dr. Aris said, his voice muffled by his mask. Lid's been photographed, dusted, and swabbed. No prints, no fibers, no tool marks we can identify. The seals are compromised by rust, but it was clearly locked at the time of burial. Let's see what's inside. 2 ME. Techs, both built like linebackers, stepped forward. They didn't have a key. They had a set of crowbars and a heavy-duty bolt cutter. This was the part Harding hated. It felt like a violation. A second one. Gently, Dr. Aris cautioned, though it was a pointless command. The tech wedged the crowbar into the seam between the lid and the base. He put his weight on it. Nothing. The rust held. Put your back into it, Paul, the other tech said. Paul grunted, his face turning red. He bounced on the bar, and with a sound like a gunshot, a sharp metallic crack, the main latch snapped. They moved to the hinges. This was worse. The metal didn't break. It screamed. A high-pitched metallic shriek of tortured, rusted steel that cut through the tent and made Evans, standing just outside, flinch. One by one, the hinges gave way. Screech. Pop, screech, finally it was loose. The tech stepped back, breathing heavily. A fine, reddish-brown rust dust hung in the air. All right, Dr. Aris said. He nodded to the techs. Lift it, slowly, and vent away from us. They took hold of the lid and lifted it, tilting it away. Harding instinctively braced himself. He'd been to this party before. The smell was the first wave. The decomp bloom, a thick, wet, impossibly sweet and sour odor that clung to your clothes and lived in your sinuses for days. But the smell never came. As the lid came off, a puff of dry air escaped. It didn't smell like decay. It smelled like a root cellar. It smelled like a forgotten attic. It was the scent of dust, dry leaves, and the sharp alkaline tang of lime. Lime, Tanaka breathed, moving closer with her camera. The son of a bitch used lime. Harding nodded grimly. It was an old-school trick, something you'd read about in a Prohibition-era gangster story. It was also brutally effective. The quicklime would have accelerated decomposition, burning away the soft tissue, destroying evidence and neutralizing the very smell that might have led a dog like Ruger to the spot years ago. The killer hadn't just been angry. They had been smart. Dr. Aris stepped forward, his own small pen light illuminating the interior. There was no body. Not really. Just the occupant. A human skeleton, almost perfectly intact, lay nestled in the rotted, shredded remains of what might have been a velvet lining. The lime had turned everything inside into a dry, gray-white tableau of dust and bone. The remains were clad in the tattered, delicate threads of a simple dress, the fabric so decayed it looked like a spider's web draped over the bones. Harding felt the familiar, cold detachment settle over him. It was a scene, a puzzle of calcium and dust. He was looking for anomalies. Rings? No. Bullet holes? Not visible. Trauma to the skull? His eyes traced the line of the skeleton. The legs, the hips, the ribs. Wait, Dr. Aris said, leaning in. His penlight focused on the skeletons, neck just on the clavicle. Jen, get a shot of this, right here. There was something there. Resting on the bone, dulled by the lime dust, was a thin silver chain, and hanging from it, an object. Harding took an involuntary step forward, breaking his self-imposed distance. His cop brain was screaming evidence, but the older, deeper part of his mind was screaming something else. Tanaka gently brushed the dust away with a soft, camel hair brush. The object was small and tarnished, nearly black. But the shape was unmistakable. It was an apple, a small silver apple-shaped locket. No, Harding whispered. The word came out of him before he could stop it. Dr. Aris looked up, surprised by the detective's tone. You know it, Sal? Harding didn't answer. He was no longer in the tent. He was in the Maplewood Elementary Auditorium 9 years ago. The room smelled like floor wax and stale pizza from the fundraiser. He was there for a PTA safety night presentation. He was shaking hands, a standard meet and greet. A young woman with a bright 1,000-watt smile walked up to him. Detective Harding, I'm Elizabeth Gable, the new third-grade teacher. I just wanted to thank you for coming. He shook her hand. She was energetic, passionate, the kind of teacher you'd want for your own kids. And he remembered clear as day the little silver locket she was wearing. My first Teacher of the Month gift, she'd said, touching it proudly. From the PTA. Isn't it sweet? Harding's vision snapped back to the tent. He was staring at the same locket, now resting in a bed of bone dust. The engraving was faint, filled with lime, but he knew what it said. Ms. Gable, we love you. The case file in his head, the one marked, missing person non-suspicious, burst into flames. This wasn't a case. This was an execution. Sal, you okay? Dr. Aris asked, his voice soft. Harding turned away, his face a hard mask. He couldn't look at it anymore. He pushed his way out of the tent flap, ripping his mask off. He stumbled onto the grass, into the chaotic noise and flashing lights of the circus, and gasped for the cold, clean night air. It didn't help. He could still smell the dust. He could still smell the lime. Detective Harding didn't just walk out of the tent. He fled it, punching through the heavy vinyl flap like a man escaping a fire. He stumbled onto the wet grass, the scene's chaos washing over him. The whump, whump, whump of the Channel 6 news helicopter was suddenly audible. a predatory vulture circling overhead. The air was cold, but Harding was sweating. He ripped his tie loose, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. He could still see it, burned onto the back of his eyelids. The little silver apple, nestled in the gray dust of what was once a person he knew. Elizabeth Gable. Ms. Gable, we love you. In his 28 years on the force, Harding had seen the worst of human nature. He'd seen bodies pulled from rivers, victims of domestic rage and the senseless, bloody aftermath of robberies gone wrong. He'd learned to build a wall, a thick concrete barrier between the job and the man. It was the only way to survive. That apple-shaped locket had just taken a sledgehammer to the wall. This wasn't an anonymous victim. This was Elizabeth, the bright-eyed third-grade teacher, the one who brought homemade cookies to the precinct for Police Appreciation Week. The one his own granddaughter, who was just a toddler back then, would have had as a teacher if they lived one zip code over. This wasn't just a murder. This was an assassination of his town. His grief lasted for exactly 30 seconds. Then, something else, something cold and hard and much more useful, replaced it. Rage. It was a quiet, controlled, slow-burning fury that settled deep in his gut. This wasn't a case file. This was a debt. Harding straightened up. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, his eyes scanning the scene. The rookies were managing the crowd. The forensics team was buzzing around the tent. Brody was talking to a shell-shocked Officer Evans, who was sitting on the tailgate of his truck, his K-9 partner Ruger, resting his head on his handler's knee. Harding walked toward them, his limp more pronounced, his footsteps heavy. "Sarge?" Harding's voice was different. It wasn't the gravelly, tired voice from an hour ago. It was flat, cold, and sharp as a razor. Brody turned. "Sal, you okay? You look like you've seen a—" "It's Elizabeth Gable," Harding cut him off. Brody's face went blank. "Gable? The missing teacher? From 9 years ago," Harding finished. "The walkaway. The one we all figured ran off to Hawaii with some guy." Brody looked at the forensic tent, then back at Harding. The color drained from his face. "Oh, Jesus, Sal, you're sure? She's still wearing the locket the PTA gave her." The two men stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their 9-year-old failure settling on them. They hadn't just missed a case. They had let her rot here, just yards from where children played, for nearly a decade. "The son of a bitch," Brody whispered, his voice thick. "Right," Harding said. "So, this is how it's gonna be." He was in command now, his mind a steel trap, clicking through the implications. "This scene is compromised. It's a dump site. The, real scene, the primary, is the school." Brody's eyes widened. "The school?" "Think about it," Harding said, his mind racing. Her car was in the lot. Her keys and her purse were on her desk. She never left the building. She was killed inside that building on a Friday afternoon. He pointed to the brightly lit school. "That building is not a school anymore. It's a 9-year-old crime scene. We're locking it down." "Sal, it's—" Brody started. "It's Sunday night. School's in session tomorrow. The superintendent will have our badges if we—" "I don't care about the superintendent," Harding roared, his voice cutting through the noise. The nearby uniforms flinched. "I don't care about the PTA. I don't care about the bake sale. You're going to call the superintendent, and you are going to tell him Maplewood Elementary is closed until further notice. And if he has a problem with it, he can call the DA directly." He turned to Evans. "Your dog did good, officer. Now I need him to do more. I need him in that school. I need him to find where she died." Evans, seeing the fire in the old detective's eyes, just nodded. "He's ready when you are, sir." "Good." Harding turned back to Brody. "Get me the janitor, the one who was here 9 years ago. Find him. I don't care if he's retired. I don't care if he's in Florida. Get him. I need blueprints. I need to know every closet, every boiler room, every crawl space in that building." Harding's mind was on fire. "The casket. Where do you get a casket? You don't just buy one at home. Depot. This took planning. This took time. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was cold, calculated, and methodical. And the location. This wasn't just convenient. This was symbolic. This was a statement. I'm taking her from the place she loves, and I'm leaving her here forever, right under your noses. The person who did this wasn't a stranger. They weren't a drifter. The person who did this belonged here. A teacher, a parent, a maintenance worker, someone with keys, someone who knew the patrol schedules, someone who could operate a backhoe or dig a 6-foot grave without anyone noticing. Harding's gaze lifted from the chaotic scene and drifted once again to the quiet, dark houses that ringed the soccer field. The neighbors were still out, a small, ghoulish gallery in robes and pajamas watching the show. His eyes scanned the faces, lit by the pulsing red and blue lights, and he saw it. Top floor, corner house. The one with the perfect landscaping. Most of the house was dark, but in the attic window a single light was on, a shadow, just a silhouette standing back from the glass. As Harding watched, the shadow moved and the light in the attic window clicked off. A cold, spider-like dread crawled up Harding's spine. They were watching. The killer. After 9 years of silence, their perfect secret world had just been dug up, and they were standing right there in one of these houses watching the circus. Watching him. Brody, Harding said, his voice a low growl, never taking his eyes off the dark window. Yes, Al. Get a uniform on every corner of this block. Start a canvass. I want to know who lives in every one of these houses. I want to know who was here 9 years ago. And I want to know who's home tonight. Harding didn't wait for the canvass. He didn't wait for Brody to organize a team of uniforms to go door to door with polite questions and clipboards. He moved. Sal, wait, Brody called after him, his voice a mix of confusion and procedural panic. We gotta secure the scene. We gotta wait for... Protocol went out the window with the casket, Sarge, Harding said over his shoulder, his voice a low growl. That's not a neighbor. That's a spectator. They've been waiting 9 years for this show, and I'm not letting them go to bed. He left the chaos behind. He ducked under the yellow do not cross tape, stepping off the damp, trampled grass of the soccer field and onto the perfect, asphalt-paved sidewalk of Maple Avenue. The change in atmosphere was instant. He left the generator, the squawking radios and the strobe of red and blue lights. He stepped into the absolute crushing silence of affluent suburbia. The street was lined with ancient, 100-year-old oak trees, their branches forming a dark canopy. The houses were immaculate, restored Victorians and sprawling Tudors, set, back on lawns so green and perfectly manicured they looked like astroturf. A black GMC Yukon sat in one driveway, an American flag hanging, perfectly still, from the porch of another. This was the image of safety, the illusion they sold themselves. It was the reason people paid $500,000 premiums to live in this school district. Harding's footsteps were the only sound, the hard slap of his leather-soled shoes on the concrete. The news helicopter was a distant whomp-whomp to the south, but here on this street it was just him and the houses. His eyes were locked on his target, the corner house, the one with the perfect landscaping and the dark attic window. He walked up the herringbone-patterned brick walkway. A tasteful, unlit pumpkin sat on the porch step. A brass plaque next to the door read, "The Whitmans." He didn't knock. He hammered the door with the heel of his hand, 3 hard concussive raps that echoed in the quiet street. He waited 5 seconds. He hammered it again. Boom, boom, boom. A light flicked on inside. Muffled footsteps. The sound of a deadbolt sliding back. The door opened a few inches, held by a brass security chain. A woman's face, pale and framed by perfect, silver blonde hair, appeared in the crack. She was in an expensive-looking silk robe. "My God," she said, her voice breathy with feigned surprise. "What is it? What's all that noise? Is everyone all right?" Harding held his badge up to the crack. "Detective Harding, ma'am, I need you to open the door." It's It's after midnight, Detective. I was asleep. No, you weren't, Harding said, his voice flat. You were in your attic window watching us. Open the door, Mrs. Whitman. The woman's face tightened. She closed the door for a second, the chain rattled, and she opened it fully. She was trying to look indignant, but Harding could see the tremor in her hand as she clutched the robe at her throat. This was Cynthia Whitman. Harding remembered the name from the old file. PTA president 9 years prior. I have no idea what you're implying, she said, stepping back. I'm not implying, Harding said, stepping past her into the foyer. He didn't wait for an invitation. The house was immaculate. It smelled like lemon polish and old money. The furniture was all antique, dark wood and cold leather. It didn't look like a home, it looked like a museum. You can't just, she started. Were you watching us from the attic? He repeated. I heard the noise. I went up to look. Is that a crime? Depends on what you were watching, Harding said. He turned to face her. We found a body, Mrs. Whitman, buried on the school grounds. Cynthia Whitman put a perfectly manicured hand to her mouth. Oh no? How horrible. Here? In Maplewood? You were PTA president 9 years ago, correct? Harding probed, his eyes scanning the room, landing on a wall of perfectly arranged family photos? Yes. My son Robert was in 3rd grade. Why? You knew Elizabeth Gable. The air in the room changed. Her performance of the shocked neighbor evaporated, replaced by a sudden glacial stillness. Yes, she said, her voice a notch lower. Of course. It was a terrible tragedy. We believe the body we found is Elizabeth. Harding watched her. He was a human polygraph, and he was looking for the tell. He expected shock, grief, tears. He got nothing. Cynthia Whitman's expression didn't change. She just stared at him, her blue eyes as cold and hard as the glass in the picture frames. You don't seem very surprised, Harding said. I'm in shock, Detective. We all assumed she just left. No, you didn't, Harding said, walking toward the photo wall. We assumed that. You knew her. His eyes found the photo. It was a class picture. Maplewood Elementary, 30. Grade 2016. And there in the center was Elizabeth Gable, beaming, surrounded by 20 smiling children. His eyes went right to her neck. The silver apple locket. You gave her this, didn't you? Harding said, tapping the glass. The locket. The PTA did. It was a Teacher of the Month gift. We all loved her. There it was. That phrase. We all loved her. It sounded like a lie. No, you didn't, Harding said, turning to face her. You didn't like her. Did you, Cynthia? Her composure finally broke. A flash of something hot and ugly passed over her perfect features. She was complicated. She wasn't the person everyone thought she was. And what person was that? She was... Cynthia paused, choosing her words. She was young. She didn't respect the traditions of this community. She had favorites. Favorites? Harding pressed. She spent an inappropriate amount of time with some of the parents, with the fathers. Harding felt it. The click. The motive. Is that so? Was your husband one of her favorites, Cynthia? The woman's face went white with rage. You get out, she hissed. Get out of my house. You have no right. Harding's radio, silent until now, crackled to life, shattering the tension. The voice was Officer Evans, the canine handler, and he was out of breath. Detective Harding. Are you there? Harding unclipped the radio. Go ahead, Evans. Sir, you need to get back here. You need to get to the school. We're in. What is it, officer? A pause. Evans's voice was tight with a new kind of dread. We're in her old classroom. Room 104. Ruger's here. He just alerted again, sir. He's alerting on the wall, behind the goddamn chalkboard. The radio crackled, the words hanging in the sterile, antique-filled foyer, behind the goddamn chalkboard. Detective Harding's gaze was still locked on Cynthia Whitman. Her face, a mask of calculated indignation just a second ago, had frozen. She'd heard it too. "Detective?" she said, her voice a fraction too high. What was that?" Harding didn't answer her. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say, "Thank you for your time." He just turned on his heel and walked out, letting the heavy oak door slam shut behind him. He was already down the brick walkway, his bad knee forgotten, adrenaline surging through him like a high-voltage current. He left her standing in her perfect house, her web of 9-year-old accusations, inappropriate favorites, the father's, hanging in the air. Her lies were for later. The wall was for now. He hit the sidewalk and started moving fast, a half jog, back toward the chaos. The noise of the scene, the generators, the shouting, the radios grew louder as he approached. Brody saw him coming and met him at the tape. "Sal, what the hell, you can't just run off and—" "That was the old PTA president's house. What did she say?" "She lied," Harding said, ducking under the tape. "She hated Gable." He didn't slow down, pushing past a rookie. "Where's the school entrance?" "Harding? Wait!" Brody yelled, scrambling to keep up. "What's this about a chalkboard?" "She wasn't killed out here," Harding growled, pointing at the grave site, which was now just a bright, sterile tent. That was the end. The cleanup. He pointed at the school, dark and looming. She was killed in there. A uniformed officer was standing by the main entrance, a set of pro-pry bars in his hand. The lock on the heavy glass door was broken. "This way, detective," the officer said, holding the door open. Harding stepped inside, and the cold night air was replaced by the smell of the school. It was an assault on the senses. The scent of industrial-strength floor wax, stale milk from the cafeteria, and that unmistakable, papery smell of crayons. It was the smell of childhood. Tonight, it smelled like a tomb. His footsteps echoed on, the polished linoleum. The hallway was dark, save for the emergency exit signs casting a sick red glow. All the classroom doors were closed. Construction paper turkeys and laminated "Happy Fall, y'all." Signs were stapled to the bulletin boards, a cheerful, mocking gallery of innocence. "Down here," the officer said, his flashlight beam bouncing. "Room 104. Harding saw it, the small plastic plaque next to the door. It read, "Mrs. Peterson, 3rd grade." But he knew from the case file burned into his memory, this had been Elizabeth Gable's room. He pushed the door open. The room was a classroom. Small desks were arranged in pods of 4. A colorful reading nook was in the corner, filled with beanbag chairs. A word wall was covered in laminated index cards, and in the center of the room, on the main wall, stood Officer Evans, his K-9 partner Ruger, and Jen Tanaka from forensics. Ruger was no longer whining. He wasn't trembling. He was rigid, focused, a predator that had found its prey. His nose was pressed so hard against the bottom of a large rolling whiteboard that his muzzle was flattened against the metal frame. "He won't leave it, sir," Evans said, his voice low. "I ran him through the whole school. He was neutral until he got to this door. He dragged me in here and he went straight to that." "It's not a remains alert," Evans continued. "It's a trace alert. It's old, but it's strong. Blood. Human blood, heavily cleaned. But he's got it." Harding stared at the whiteboard. It was a modern porcelain steel board on wheels, but it was bolted to the wall with heavy-duty brackets. It looked new. Too new. "This building's from the 50s, Harding said, his detective's mind cataloging the details. The original boards were slate, green or black. This is a cover-up." Jen Tanaka stepped forward, her UV light already in hand. "The board itself is clean, wiped down with industrial cleaner, probably every day for 9 years. But look at the wall around it." She shined the high-intensity light on the wall. The whiteboard was just slightly smaller than the faded square of paint it was covering. "It's hiding something," Harding said. "Get it off the wall." A forensics tech who had been waiting in the hall came in with a power drill and a crowbar. The whir of the drill was obscene in the quiet classroom, a violent, modern sound desecrating the space. One by one, the tech backed the lag bolts. Out of the stud screech. The metal bracket scraped against the wall. "Okay," the tech said, stepping back. "It's loose, it's heavy." Harding and Brody grabbed one side, Evans and the tech the other. On three, 1, 2, 3, pull. They hauled the heavy whiteboard away from the wall. It came free with a groan, and they leaned it against the student desks. A cloud of fine white plaster dust mushroomed into the air. For a second, they saw nothing, just the original pale green painted plaster of the wall. "Sir, look," Evans said, pointing his flashlight. There it was. It was a patch. A nearly perfect 4-foot by 4-foot square of new drywall. The plastering job was amateurish. The mud smeared unevenly at the edges. It had been painted over with a slightly different shade of green, a hasty, sloppy attempt to match the original. Ruger lunged at the patch, sniffing frantically at a spot near the floor, his tail rigid. "It's in the wall," Tanaka whispered, her voice full of awe. He put the evidence in the wall. Harding didn't wait for permission. He snatched the crowbar from the tech. "Everyone back, mask up." He took the pointed end of the bar, aimed for the center of the patch, and slammed it home with all his weight. Crunch. The drywall gave way. It was hollow. He jammed the bar in, found a stud, and pulled. A huge section of the drywall ripped free, exploding in a shower of plaster, dust, and rotted insulation. Ruger barked once, a sharp, concussive sound. Harding shined his maglite into the dark, musty void between the studs. It wasn't empty. Stuffed deep inside the wall cavity, bundled up, in a tight, dark mass, was a pile of cloth. It looked like a janitor's old moldy rags. Tanaka stepped forward, her camera clicking. "Don't touch it, Sal. Let me." She reached in with a long pair of forensic forceps and gently, carefully, began to pull the bundle out. It wasn't rags. The bundle, unfurled as it came free, tumbling onto the floor in a cloud of dust and dried mold. It was a child's bright yellow rain slicker. The kind every kid at Maplewood Elementary probably had in their cubby. And it was covered. The front of the raincoat was stained with a massive, dark, almost black pattern. "Oh my God," Evans breathed. But Tanaka was focused on the hole in the wall. "Sal, the wall, the original wall, behind the patch." Harding aimed his light into the hole. On the old, original lathe and plaster, now exposed, he saw it. A fine, spidery, upward-arcing spray of dark stains. "Cast off," Tanaka said, her voice clinical but shaking. "Blunt force trauma. This is it. This is where he hit her. This is the kill site." Harding stared, his mind racing. The killer, covered in blood, had grabbed a kid's raincoat from a hook to stop the spatter. He'd killed her right here. Then he'd stuffed the raincoat in the wall, patched the hole, and painted it. And for 9 years, a new whiteboard had been rolled in front of it. And a generation of third graders had learned their multiplication tables just feet from a murder. "The DNA," Harding growled, looking at the stained raincoat. "It's all right there. Her blood and his. Here is part 8, the concluding chapter of this story arc, written in the requested American style. Part 8. The longest night for a full minute. Nobody in room 104 spoke. The only sound was the faint drip, drip, drip of a leaky radiator in the corner. The air, thick with plaster dust and the 9-year-old smell of mold, hung heavy. The child's yellow raincoat lay on the linoleum floor, like a fallen toxic leaf, the dark rust-colored stains stark under the glare of Tanaka's forensic light. It wasn't a classroom anymore. It was a crypt. Officer Evans was kneeling, his hand firmly on Ruger's back. The dog was finally calm. His job was done. He had found the beginning, just as he had found the end. Brody just stared at the hole in the wall, his face a pale, grayish white. "In the wall," he whispered, shaking his head. "The son of a bitch put her in the wall?" "Not her," Tanaka corrected, her voice clinical but trembling. She was carefully, methodically placing the raincoat into a massive evidence bag. "The evidence? This is the whole case, Sal," Harding nodded, his mind 1,000 miles away. He hit her, he said, reconstructing the scene. Right here. Blunt force trauma, Tanaka said. It was messy. He panicked. He grabbed the first thing he could, Evans said, pointing to the row of colorful empty cubby hooks by the door. One of the kids' raincoats. To stop the, Then he patched the wall, Brody added. He patched it, painted it, and bolted a whiteboard over it. Who the hell does that? Someone who had time, Harding said, his voice a low growl. Someone who belonged here. Someone who knew this school wouldn't be deep cleaned for summer break for another week. Someone who knew how to patch drywall. His mind was racing, connecting the two scenes. The kill site, room 104, and the burial site, the soccer field. This was not one crime. This was two. First, the hot, panicked, violent murder. The blood, the raincoat, the frantic patch job. Then, the second crime. The cold, methodical, ritualistic burial. Sal, I don't get it, Brody said, rubbing his exhausted face. Okay, he kills her here. He hides the evidence in the wall. What about her? He can't just leave a body in the classroom, and he damn sure can't walk it out the front door on a Friday afternoon. Harding stared at the patch in the wall. He didn't. He hid her. He hid her in the school. Where? The boiler room, a supply closet, a janitorial space, Harding said. He kills her Friday, he stashes the body, he patches the wall, he goes home, he waits. Waits for what? Evans asked. Saturday, Harding said. He waits for the school to be empty. He comes back, probably, with his own truck. He gets a backhoe from the maintenance shed, the same shed Ruger alerted on. He digs the hole. He brings the casket. A casket, Sal? Brody's voice was incredulous. Where does a guy get a casket on a Saturday? He didn't buy it, Harding said. His eyes went dark. He stole it, or he had it already. This was planned. The burial was planned. The murder. Maybe not. But the burial was. Harding felt the pieces sliding into place, forming a picture so ugly it made him sick. A killer who knew the school's layout. A killer with access, keys, and knowledge of the maintenance equipment. A killer who could plaster a wall. A killer who hated Elizabeth Gable. His mind snapped back to Cynthia Whitman, in her silk robe, in her perfect house on the hill. She had favorites. The fathers. Brody, Harding ordered. Get back to that house, Whitman's. I don't care what she says. Get her husband. I want to know where he was every single day of that week, 9 years ago. I want to know if he ever did construction. I want to know if he had a key to this school. And Sal, what about her? Brody asked, pointing at the wall. She was a PTA president, Harding said, thinking. She'd have access. But a backhoe? A casket? No. This is... He stopped. His eyes fell on the yellow raincoat Tanaka was now sealing. It was small. Tiny. Jen, Harding said. That coat, is there a name on it? Tanaka stopped. She looked at the tag inside the collar, which she had been carefully preserving. She looked up at Harding, her eyes wide. Yeah, detective, she said, her voice barely a whisper. There is. The name Robert is written on the tag, in black Sharpie. Robert Harding's blood turned to ice. He looked at the wall of perfect framed photos in Cynthia Whitman's house, the one he'd just left. The class photo from 2016. My son, Robert, was in 3rd grade, Cynthia's son. The raincoat. It wasn't just a kid's raincoat, it was her kid's raincoat. The implications hit Harding like a physical blow. The killer wasn't just a jealous wife. The motive wasn't just the father's. It was something darker, something twisted, something involving her husband, and her own 3rd grade son, who was right here in this classroom. Harding turned and walked out of the room, out of the hallway, and back out the main doors of the school. The chaos of the scene was gone. The crowds had been dispersed. The TV vans had left. The only thing left was the forensic tent, glowing under the first sick gray-purple light of dawn. The long night was over. He stood on the sidewalk, his body aching, his mind numb. He looked at the empty grave, now just a roped-off square of dirt. He looked at the school, a tomb of brick and glass. And he looked up at the house on the hill. The lights were all off now. The attic window was dark, but he knew they were awake. They were watching. They knew he'd found it. The case wasn't just reopened. It was alive. And the monster who did this had been living a quiet, perfect suburban life for 9 years, just waiting for the sound of a shovel. Outro. Thank you so much for following this 8-part journey with me. This case is just beginning, and the mystery of what happened in room 104 is far from over. We've uncovered the where and the how, but the who and the why just got 1,000 times more complicated, and that brings me to my question for all of you. What do you think is more terrifying? The monster who commits a crime of passion and panics? Or the monster who can kill, patch the wall, go home, and then come back 24 hours later with a casket to finish the job? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, thank you for watching.